Snow was still falling over Esquimalt harbor when the sound came through the dark. Thin and broken, part whimper, part argument, as if something small had decided that dying quietly was beneath its dignity. Grant Farley heard it from the maintenance yard, where he had been working since before dawn, with no particular reason to stop, and no particular desire to go home. He was 52, broad across the shoulders, with close-cropped gray-brown hair, and a jaw that had stopped being clean-shaven sometime around the 3rd anniversary of Louise's funeral. His blue eyes were steady when people watched him, and distant when they did not. The base around him was quiet at this hour. Hulls and security lights reflecting off the black water of the harbor. The mountains across the strait barely visible through the snowfall. Dark shapes making no promises. He had been a Canadian Forces operator for 23 years. He had come home from Kandahar with a bad knee and a folder of commendations and the specific kind of silence that settles inside a person when the things that gave their life shape are gone. His military working dog, Talon, a black and tan shepherd who had moved like smoke and trusted Grant's voice on the ground beneath his paws, had died in a compound in Panjwai, taking a blast that should have been Grant's. Louise had been diagnosed 6 months into his final deployment. She had waited for him, stubbornly, in the way she did everything, but cancer did not negotiate, and Grant had made it home with 3 weeks to spare. 3 weeks was not enough. It was never going to be enough. Since then, he had gone through the motions. A maintenance contract on CFB Esquimalt, a small apartment near Admiral's Road, a truck that started most mornings. He moved through the days like a man navigating a house in the dark, careful not to knock anything over. The sound came again, and Grant stopped walking. It was coming from behind the supply depot, near a drainage run that flooded every November and froze every December. He followed it to a collapsed length of timber that had blown loose from a storage structure, and beneath it, wedged against the concrete wall, was a cardboard carton soaked through, its lid held down by the weight of snow. He crouched without thinking. His gloved hand rested on the cardboard, and whatever was inside went quiet. Then it started again, a rising, rattling series of sounds, indignant and afraid at the same time. He lifted the lid. A German shepherd puppy blinked up at him from a scrap of wet cloth. 8 weeks old, maybe, with pale gold fur darkened by slush, a black saddle beginning to form along his back and ears too large for his head, one already standing, one still deciding. He was shaking hard. His eyes were the color of old whiskey, and they fixed on Grant with an expression that was equal parts terror and accusation. Grant exhaled slowly. "You've got opinions about this situation, do you?" The puppy answered immediately. Not a bark, not quite a whine, a long, wavering string of sounds that moved up and down like a sentence with too many clauses. It was completely unreasonable. It vibrated somewhere in Grant's ribcage that had not registered anything in a very long time. He unzipped his jacket and lifted the puppy against his chest. The little animal stopped shaking for exactly 2 seconds. Then pressed his cold nose into the hollow beneath Grant's jaw and made a low, slow hum that felt less like noise and more like insistence. "All right," Grant said, to no one in particular. "All right." Dr. Nina Caro arrived at the base kennel facility just after 6 with coffee. She hadn't had time to finish, and the practical calm of a woman who had made her peace with being called in before breakfast. She was 38, with warm brown skin, dark hair pulled into a braid already coming loose, and hazel eyes that moved quickly across a room, gathering information the way other people gathered excuses. She had spent 11 years as a military veterinarian and had the hands to prove it. Sure and careful, never rushed. She examined the puppy on the metal table and spoke in a low, even voice that seemed to reach the animal before the words did. "Male, about 8 weeks. Hypothermic, but not critical. Dehydrated." She paused, head tilting. "He's been vocalizing since you came in." "Since I found him," Grant said from the doorway. Nina looked at the puppy, then at Grant. "He tracks your voice." "He's a dog." "Not like this." She touched the puppy's chest, and he gave a small, rounded sound, not a protest, something softer, the way a note holds at the end of a song before the room goes quiet. Nina set down her stethoscope. "His breathing slows when you speak. That's not instinct. That's something else." Grant said nothing. He was watching the puppy's ears, the standing one and the uncertain one, and thinking of Talon, who had tilted his head in exactly that way whenever Grant was deciding something he hadn't yet admitted to. He hadn't meant to name the dog. Names were commitments, and Grant had stopped making those. But the puppy looked up with those whiskey eyes and released one particular sound, low and complicated, like a question he wasn't finished asking, and the word came to Grant as if it had been stored somewhere warm, waiting. "Frost," he said quietly. The puppy's good ear snapped forward. His tail, barely more than a tuft, moved once with absolute conviction. The kennel at CFB Esquimalt was designed for working dogs between deployments, clean, functional, smelling of disinfectant and institutional purpose. Within 3 days of Frost's arrival, it had become something that several people crossed the base without clear reason to visit. Floyd McCready was the first, which surprised nobody who knew him. Floyd was 61, built like an old freighter, wide through the chest, slow to change course, permanently skeptical around the mustache. He had worked maintenance on the base for 30 years, and had opinions about everything, which he expressed to whoever was nearest, regardless of rank or apparent interest. His hands were the kind that had fixed enough broken things to know when something wasn't worth fixing, and when it very much was. He appeared in the kennel doorway on Frost's second morning, holding a thermos and a biscuit wrapped in a paper towel, as if he happened to be walking past with both. "Heard there was a dog," he said, as if this explained nothing and therefore everything. Frost looked at him through the kennel bars and gave 3 short, cheerful syllables. Floyd crouched down, which took longer than it used to, and held out the biscuit. "I don't see why they have to be so small." Frost took the biscuit with great seriousness, and then made a low, rolling sound that moved through the kennel like warmth. Floyd stood, cleared his throat, and found something on the wall worth examining. "I'll come back and check the pipes in this end of the facility," he told Grant. "Been meaning to get to it." It had not been on any list. Jasper Wolfe came the same afternoon, a 26-year-old naval rating with sandy hair and a habit of standing slightly to the left of wherever he was meant to be, as if still deciding whether to stay. He had been back from a training exercise off the Nova Scotia coast for 3 months, since a mechanical failure and 3 hours in rough water waiting for rescue had left him technically fine and functionally not. He still flinched at sudden metallic sounds. He still slept with the light on. He had told nobody this because in his estimation, the Navy did not have a form for it. He stopped outside the kennel with a clipboard he did not need. Frost went still in a way he didn't when others came in. Then came a sound, not the cheerful yipping he gave Floyd, not the rolling recognition he gave Grant. Something steadier. Something with weight in it, soft enough to enter the space a person's pride left unguarded. Jasper's clipboard hand stopped trembling. "What's he doing?" he whispered. "Responding to you," Nina said from behind him. She had been watching from the hallway. She wrote one line in her notebook, differentiates, matches emotional register of individual. Grant stood near the back wall and did not say what he was thinking, that Frost was doing exactly what Talon used to do before a bad night, choosing the most wounded person in the room and simply being there, without demand, without explanation. The video happened on a Thursday. A utility helicopter came in low over the base on a routine maintenance run, and Frost was in the exercise yard when the sound hit. Several people across the yard went rigid in the particular way of those who had heard that sound before in contexts they would prefer not to revisit. Jasper set down a wrench and pressed his back against the nearest wall. Frost raised his muzzle. What followed was not barking. It was a long, low series of sounds that rose and fell in the spaces between the rotors, threading through the mechanical noise the way light threads through cold water, present without competing, steady without demanding. People stopped moving. Men who had been crossing the yard with purpose simply stood and listened to a German shepherd puppy hold a conversation with a helicopter. Jasper's breathing, which had gone shallow and rapid, began to slow. A sailor named Dwayne, 19 years old and never far from his phone, filmed it for 27 seconds and posted it that evening with the caption, "This rescue pup at Esquimalt just sang back at the helicopter like he was disagreeing with it. "I'd man, just watch." By the next morning it had 200,000 views. By evening, 500,000. Floyd read comments aloud to Grant in the kennel, with the expression of a man receiving information he had already suspected but had preferred not to have confirmed. "My grandfather served 30 years and wept for the first time in decades listening to this dog," Floyd read. He set the phone down. "I'm not going to continue reading because I have a reputation to maintain." Nina said nothing. She was looking at Frost's cortisol levels on her tablet, measured before and after the helicopter incident. The spike was real. The recovery, once he oriented back toward Grant's voice, was faster than anything in the literature. She wrote in her notes, "He is not performing. He is responding to something he cannot name, toward people who are unable to name it either." The letter arrived 6 days later in a cream envelope with no return stamp, forwarded through public affairs with a note that said only, "Seemed like it belonged here." Grant read it at the desk in the kennel office with Frost asleep across his boots. "Dear Sir, my name is Lily Desroches. I am 9 years old and I live in Kelowna, BC with my Aunt Carol. My dad was Corporal Mark Desroches. You knew him. He was in your unit before he was hurt overseas. He came home but he was different after. And in 2022 he didn't wake up one morning and the doctor said his heart stopped. I don't know why I'm writing this. Aunt Carol says to write what I can't say out loud. I watched the video of the dog who talked back at the helicopter and I couldn't stop crying. But it wasn't a sad cry. It was like something I had forgotten was true, suddenly was true again. My dad used to say that some sounds carry people home. I think the dog knows about sounds like that. Could you tell him that a girl in Kelowna is grateful? Her name is Lily." Grant read it 3 times. Between the second and third reading, Frost lifted his head from Grant's boots, looked up at his face, and gave one low sound. The same weighted, tender sound he gave Jasper, as if the letter had passed through Grant before Grant could protect himself from it. Grant's hand found the fur between Frost's uneven ears. "You're reaching people we've never met," he said quietly. Frost closed his eyes. Commander Blair Ashford arrived the following Monday with an efficiency that suggested he had not slept particularly well and intended to resolve that by making decisions. He was 50, trim with iron-gray hair and pale eyes that processed information quickly. He was not a cruel man. He was a man trained to weigh things, and right now he was weighing a puppy against a policy. He stood outside Frost's kennel with a folder. Frost looked at him and made one small, uncertain sound. "Remarkable animal," Ashford said. "Yes," Nina said from one step to his left. The folder contained a transfer order. Due to the public profile of the animal and reported behavioral indicators, Ottawa wanted Frost assessed for a formal therapeutic placement program. Transfer within 72 hours. Controlled environment. Proper evaluation framework. Grant's jaw tightened. He had heard the word evaluation used this way before. It meant something was going to be measured until it understood what it was supposed to become. Nina stepped forward with her tablet. "Commander, his responses are not to stimulus. They're to state. He differentiates between individuals. He tracks emotional distress with a specificity that isn't trainable. It's intrinsic. A controlled assessment environment may destroy the very thing we're attempting to study." Ashford looked from the folder to Frost, who was watching him with bright eyes, and the patient expression of a creature who had been in difficult meetings before. Floyd, from the back of the room, "Ottawa's idea of an assessment is usually a form in triplicate and an 18-month waiting list." Ashford ignored this, which Grant suspected was the only wise available response. 72 hours, Ashford said. Prepare the animal. That night the snow came back, soft and indifferent, covering the base in the specific quiet that February brings to the coast of British Columbia when it has something to say, and all the time in the world to say it. Grant sat on the floor outside Frost's kennel with his back against the wall and the transfer order folded in his jacket pocket. 72 hours was shrinking. By morning it would be 48. Frost stood at the kennel door in the low amber light, watching Grant with the steady attention of a dog who had decided that certain things were not optional. Grant pulled something from beneath his collar, a thin chain. Talon's service tag, scratched and darkened at the edge, worn smooth beneath his thumb over 2 years of carrying. He had not looked at it directly in months. Looking at it meant remembering the compound, the command to hold, the half-second in which Talon had made a calculation that had never been Grant's to make. That was the wound, not the explosion, not the smoke or the silence afterward, but the fact that Talon had known, had understood, in whatever way dogs understand the arithmetic of love and danger, and had chosen anyway. Frost pressed his nose through the bars and sniffed at Grant's closed hand. "No," Grant said too sharply. Frost waited. Grant opened his hand. The tag came into view, and Frost, carefully, deliberately, with the seriousness of a creature performing something it had not been taught, took the chain between his teeth, set it back on Grant's open palm, and rested his chin over it. Then a sound came from him that Grant had not heard before, low and aching and entirely honest, the way grief sounds when it has stopped pretending to be manageable. Grant bowed his head. "He held," he said, his voice coming apart quietly in the empty room. "I gave the command and he held for half a second. Then he didn't. He just didn't." Frost hummed against his hand. "I've been telling myself that carrying his tag means I haven't left him," Grant said. "But that's not what it means, is it?" Frost lifted his eyes, whiskey gold in the low light, steady as the mountains across the water. Nina found him there an hour later. She sat across from him and set a sealed folder beside the transfer order without speaking, because she understood something important about men like Grant. That pity made them lock doors and go somewhere unreachable. The folder held 3 months of observation, Frost's emotional tracking, Jasper's physiological responses, witness statements from 8 personnel who had asked to go on record, and a formal recommendation for a community-based therapeutic placement, not a controlled facility, a property in the Okanagan, near Kelowna, run by a woman named Carol Desroches, who had already agreed in writing. "He can't remain what he is inside a facility," Nina said. "He'll only stay what he is somewhere that needs what he already knows." Floyd shouldered the door open at midnight with a thermos and a sheet of paper filled on both sides with signatures. Maintenance crew, galley staff, mechanics, medics, a retired petty officer who had driven 40 minutes and pretended he had business near the gate. "I'm not making a speech," Floyd said. "I'm delivering a document. That's the entirety of what's happening here." Grant wrote 1 page and placed it on Commander Ashford's desk at 6 in the morning, in full uniform, standing straight. "This animal does not require assessment for a capacity he has already demonstrated to 47 named individuals and 500,000 strangers. He requires placement where that capacity can continue to reach the people it is already reaching. I am requesting reclassification for community therapeutic placement. A host site has been identified. I am not requesting ownership. I am requesting we stop preparing him to become something he was never meant to be." From down the hall, Frost barked once. Sharp and clear, like a period at the end of a sentence that had been a long time in coming. Ashford read the page twice. He set it down, looked at the wall for a moment, and said, "Cancel the transfer. Dr. Carroll will draft the revised classification, community placement, pilot program." He paused. "Administrative outreach." Floyd, from somewhere behind the door, "Look at that, sense survived a committee." The drive to Kelowna took 5 hours through mountain passes that were white at the top and green at the bottom. The kind of country that reminded a person, without saying anything, that winter ended. Frost slept on the seat beside Grant with his chin on the armrest. His fur had filled in since February, golden brown, deep-saddled, thick along the neck. He was no longer the shaking thing from the drainage culvert. He was still not entirely grown, but he carried himself with the ease of an animal that understood, without words, that it was going somewhere it belonged. The property outside Kelowna was modest and snow-dusted, with a bare orchard and a red barn, and a porch light burning against the pale afternoon. A hand-painted sign hung from the gate-post, the letters careful and unhurried. Frost's Place. Grant sat with the truck idling for a moment, looking at those words. Then he got out. Carol Desroches stood on the porch in a quilted jacket, dark hair going gray at the temples, her face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had been holding things together for years, through an act of daily will rather than ease. Beside her was Lily. She was small for 9, with her father's dark eyes and a red knit hat pulled low over her ears, both hands gripping Carol's sleeve. She was looking at the truck with the stillness of a child who had learned that hoping cost something and was hoping anyway. Grant opened the passenger door. Frost jumped down into the snow, sank briefly up to his ankles, and sneezed with tremendous personal offense. Lily laughed. It was the sound of something returning, cracked and real and unmistakable. Frost found her immediately, not running, not bounding, but walking directly toward her with the certainty of a creature that had a job and understood it completely. He sat in front of her and lifted his chin, and the sound he made was the one Grant had first heard in the drainage culvert on a February morning. Low and wavering and full of something that could not be argued with. Lily's hand came free from Carol's sleeve. She knelt in the snow. Grant crouched beside Frost and put both hands on the dog's shoulders. "You don't need permission to do what you do," he said quietly. "Go on." Frost pressed his forehead briefly to Grant's chin. 1 second, warm and certain, then turned and pushed his nose into Lily's mittened hands. The girl wrapped both arms around him and stayed that way, and the mountains above the Okanagan were white and unhurried, and the porch light burned amber in the cold afternoon, and Carol pressed one hand over her mouth and didn't try to speak. Grant stood in the snow, not leaving and not staying. Present in the particular way people become present when they have set down something heavy and haven't yet decided what to do with their empty hands. He looked at the sign above the gate, the name painted there in careful letters, and he reached beneath his collar and removed Talon's tag from around his neck. He hung it on the post below the sign. The chain caught the gray light. The tag turned once, slow and quiet, in the wind coming down off the mountains. Grant walked back toward the farmhouse, where the door was already open, and where a girl he had never met before today was sitting on the floor with a dog who had been found in a snowstorm. Both of them at home in the way that some things simply are, without ceremony, without plan, as if the whole long winter had only ever been leading them here.